and 1 in 3 applications were accepted, similar to acceptance rates from high school. So the policy implications for Prince Edward Island, here was our total program cost, $1.1 million. So if you looked at it as the cost per learner, it was $2,254 per learner. If you looked at the cost of non-completion, because remember we had an attrition rate in there, that cost is $166,000. The cost per learner per day for a GED of credit was $22.90. The cost of learning per point varies from $1 to $28.50. So I was trying to cover all the bases here, however you wanted to slice this. It was worse than trying to do a divorce, and you decide who has what and who gets what. Now, the learning gains for $583,834. Here's what the province of PEI got. 57% of learners applying to post-secondary, 210 learners completed at least 1 credit, 98 learners completed GED preparation, and the wage gap was narrowed between males and females, and no longer statistically significant. A bargain at that price. And if you look at some of Scott Murray's work around the return on investment in terms of earning potential, that $583,000 translates into something like $7 million in potential earnings for these people. So if 1,000 people opted for a GED program every year, and pre-GED scores were 425 in each subject area, the average time to raise scores would be 33 days. I worked that out. Now, that's always a double-edged sword, because then they expect everybody to complete in 33 days, and you have to remember that your range can be fairly broad. The cost for those 1,000 learners, $735,000. And again, moving on to their GED. So the lessons learned from this study, because we did see that we can measure some outcomes and show success in many ways. What the lessons learned was, when you're doing this kind of study, faculty has to be nurtured through the whole study, because they're helping us with the students. They didn't have to do the measures, but they're certainly helping us with the data tracking. So we really needed to nurture them. When you have a continuous intake model, data collection, you have to have a really well-designed method to collect the data before you start. And the motivation of the learners requires continuous effort. Convince them to come back for the post-testing, convince them to come back for the follow-up. We actually paid them $25 for that for the follow-up, which wasn't a lot, but hey, it's $25. So, also lessons learned. Remember I showed you what we did at each baseline, post-intervention, and follow-up. We did a lot at the front end and very little at back end. We should have balanced that out a little bit. And lack of measures at the 6th month, like, then we didn't have anything about working and what their salaries were. So we don't know. We would assume things got better, but we don't know. So ultimately, for the $583,000, you can put that on your MasterCard, but the value you got, the cost of learning, was priceless. Any questions? I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. I'm amazed. Oh, sorry. Yes.
I know you said you didn't have a lot of post-intervention results, but do you have a sense of how many students leaving, say, a GED program applied and succeeded in some of your three key industries?
Not specifically. We don't have specific results on that. We have anecdotal evidence that shows we're moving in that direction. It's not the majority of students, but we have more going in that direction than we used to.
And the ones that aren't going into those 3 key industries, are they actually, they may be getting trained on the island, but are they actually staying?
We haven't been at it long enough to be able to say.
Because that would be an important piece.
That is very important. Very
because
important.
The wages in those are generally so low compared to the rest of Canada. It makes sense to me intuitively that, okay, so you train on PEI and you leave.
Yeah. See, what we have here is they have to get through our program, which could be a year or 2 years. Then they have to do the technology programs, which is another 2 years. And then we'd have to measure them a year out. So you're talking a 5-year span. So we haven't been out long enough to have that data. But it's good data. That's what we want to get to.
Well, and also in IT right now, there's so much money going into the IT on the island. right now, and the employers, that there's lots of people running companies in PEI, but with the way it's set up, a lot of their costs are coming through big government grants and things, and once those grants are done, and their staff right now is generally half the wages are being paid for through funding that they're getting, and in a few years that funding is going to dry up. And
What'll
it'll
happen
be
then?
interesting to see what happens when it's like the call center funding. When it ended, the jobs ended, the companies left.
I think we had a question over here too. Did we have something?
I was
Yes,
just curious as to your slide is getting you in trouble.
yes.
So if I understand that correctly, is that now like with that particular age group, the GED is like that's smarter to get than high school education?
Well, I actually took this data and I had a private meeting with the Deputy Minister of Education on Prince Edward Island, who I've worked with before, and we know each other as researchers, we have a lot of respect for each other. He was actually quite glad to have the data. He looked at that particular slide and he said, word for word, he said, this tells me that some of our students are better off leaving and get a GED and then carry on with life. Now, his area of research has been around engagement and retention in the school system. And maybe that's the way we have to go in PEI. And I know Barbara and I have talked before, Lori, about maybe some of our 14, 15-year-old students, maybe there's another pathway for them.
Well, I'm just curious too as to whether it's sort of ripple effect from K to 12 in terms of the social passing that happens now.
Exactly.
If that's part of the cause.
I would say that's part of the problem. I don't want to, again,
That's why I would be
It's-
interested as far as an age bracket, because that social passing, use of
it's a huge debate. I spent yesterday at Centennial College. I was doing some of this, and we were looking at their research too, and we got into this discussion. And social passing is a phenomenon, I guess, across Canada. And there's a psychological value to the social passing. It is having an impact on the academic end of things. So somewhere along the line, we have to come up with a better formula that even if there is social passing, the person who's been passed still has to get the support to get caught up and get the skills they need to move on. Are you familiar with George Bush's No Student Left Behind program in the US? I mean, that was a disaster. And that was why, because the resources were never put in place to help those students, and they were just pushed through the system. So we don't want to become an echo of that. At the end of the day, we're not going to get further ahead, we're going to get further behind. But one of the issues I have when I talk to policymakers around education is, yes, we have to do something with the K through 12 system. Definitely, we have to do something with early learners. But at this point in time, it's not sufficient to do only that, because all of the adults that are out there that don't have the skill set, that don't have the foundation, that can't transition, it's going to take another 20 years. If we made the school system perfect tomorrow, it's 20 years before we're going to see the benefits of that. What do we do in the meantime? And if you take someone who's 35 and isn't employable to the maximum of their abilities because of their foundation skills or education, they've still got 30 years in the workforce. That's a foolish waste of human capital to not invest in them and help them get where they need to go. That's my soapbox. There's another question? Yes.
I have a question. On the methodology for
Yes.
your credit folks, you were talking about their pre-test or their marks would have been taken from their last credit programs
Right.
in English and math?
Yes.
Or English or math?
English and math, both.
Okay. So, and yet you're saying that 94% of them had completed grade 12.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mhm.
So, I'm a bit curious about the second chance program, which is really a first chance. So they would have come in with a passing mark in English and math.
Well,
Because
in
if
high-
they have a diploma.
In Prince Edward Island, you can pass grade 12 without having passed grade 12 math, correct,
Really?
Lori? You can get a high school diploma without having your grade 12 math.
So math isn't compulsory for the secondary school.
Who knows the PEI system as well? That's my understanding,
I
but
don't know, but when people get their PEI graduation certificate for their first students, they have to have a credit in math.
they do have to have a credit in math for that. But the
grade
actual,
11.
English, you
Grade
must
11.
have.
you have to have English.
Okay, so even going back to that, so they would have had 50% if that's the
Exactly.
point.
Mhm.
So to me, it seems natural that their gain isn't going to show as much as the one who didn't have 50%.
Mhm.
Like, so I know you're saying that there's a greater gain
Mhm.
for those folks
Oh,
with
but-
no diploma.
But the other piece of it that I didn't have on that
Oh.
slide, and I realize it's a gap, is there was no difference, there was no statistical difference in the average at the baseline between the youth with high school diploma and
Okay.
the non. Yeah.
All right, so are they taking the same credit?
Yes.
This is another thing.
Oh, not necessarily, it could be any credit, it could be the credit they needed.
Okay,
Mhm.
but to post test,
Mhm.
you're gonna have to test them on English and math.
We didn't do a post-test, the post-test we did was on the literacy evaluation. The final mark was whatever credit mark they got, whatever credit they took.
In
and that was-
whatever credit they,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It's making, because normally
so
you
pretty-
wouldn't do English and
Yeah.
math and then English
Yeah.
and math.
But the
Most-
English and math was the common baseline that we chose for everyone because they're considered cornerstones to what we want to do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Sam?
It's beginning to, yes, otherwise I could see, you know, what we have in Ontario is not so much as, it's great that we're doing stuff, it's who does what.
Exactly, and how do they do
does it come out
it?
of education or does it come out of training colleges and universities?
Yeah.
Is it a first chance, is it a second chance? So I do that.
And, you know, it's, and we're in some significant discussions right now with our stakeholders at the province and Skills PEI, and they don't think our outcomes are good enough. So, okay, what is it that you want, and then how do we resource it to get what you want? And I'm a little concerned because we're dealing with a different group of people than we dealt with previously, and there seems to be some very simplistic views about what the issues are. Their belief system is that everybody starts at the same spot and it's a race, so you just
Yeah.
give them the path and away they go.
Yeah, I know.
And it's,
Well,
Yeah.
we have that nationally. I
Yeah.
mean, we have that
Yeah.
with Scott Murray stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
just to just come out and say it's only going to take 40 hours for everybody to.
And that's what they want. They want
Yeah, I
simplistic
know.
answers, and that's everybody. That's not
Mhm.
just, and we all do. I mean, we love that as human beings. Give me a simple answer to a
Oh,
problem.
sure.
But it's very complex. And we had a long discussion yesterday at Centennial College. How do you define success for these second chance learners?
Good.
And we agreed that we defined it as getting them through the door. I mean, that was the first step. If you didn't do that, nothing else was going to happen. So now there's other levels of success then after that. And we also talked very much, and I know that Skills PEI is currently looking at attrition, and what we don't have good data on, and we've got to go and get it, is the fact that, okay, Sally might have left last year, but maybe she's back this year, she's going to try it again.
Right.
And maybe this is her third time trying it, and maybe this time she'll get it.
Yes.
That is that revolving
Yes.
door.
There it is.
And if you want to have true access, you have to support that revolving door.
Sure.
So,
That was another question. Did you come up with a great methodology on the continuous intake process? Because if you did, I'm sure we liked it.
yes, well, it was dogged determination, if you call that a great methodology.
Okay.
It was really highly detailed. We just got better and better at it over the year
Okay.
for the level of detail that we had to keep track of, and hounding and being on the phone. And there's, again, it's how you had to nurture your instructors, because if we were phoning them 3 times a week, did you mark that down? Did you record that? Now, we have since then, this study was in 0809, and the data was analyzed last year. Since then, we have more of the system electronic, so there's a lot of it that we can actually pull down now and do an analysis on without even having to go back to the instructor. It's all there. And I'm in the process of working with our systems, our support systems, so that I have a flow through from the time the student applies and whatever information we get there through to what they did and then their performance going out, so that I can track back comparisons. So if they came from high school X with these marks and these are the outcomes, then how does that compare to high school Y, or how does that compare to the person that took a non-traditional trajectory, or the person that was under age 25 or over age 25 or whatever. So we can do a lot with that data, but this is the first year we've had the data set up to flow that way.
Okay, so there, in this report, there are kind of lessons learned.
Oh yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So, and research is never perfect. There's always when you're done, there's always things you didn't realize you were going to find out. And there's always things you said, gee, I wish I had asked that, and you didn't think of when you started. So, and it was very much a group effort, because in all, there's 5 researchers involved, from the design phase right through to the analysis and final report. So there was some pretty high-end thinkers on this one to make sure we had what we needed. We've started a new,